Hello and welcome to another video about Stevenson's purpose. Today's video is going to look at the possibility that we are all at root simply animals without a soul. So is Stevenson arguing that there is no salvation for us, we're never going to go to heaven? Or does evolution still allow us to believe in salvation, that we do have a soul, that we can get to heaven? So the idea that's linked here is the idea of evolution and degeneration. So when Hyde appears, he is an evolutionary step backwards. So Dr. Jekyll would be a forward step in evolution, but Hyde has gone backwards, and that's what degeneration means, to get worse. So, viewed on a simple level, Dr. Jekyll is a good man, much admired in his profession. Remember, he's a doctor. Mr. Hyde, meanwhile, is evil. He is a murderer, a monster who tramples upon a small girl simply because she happens to be in his way, and obviously he's a murderer because he doesn't kill her, he kills Sir Danvers Carew. So that's a very simplistic reading of the novel, and actually it's a wrong reading because Dr. Jekyll is not a good man, or not wholly good. On a deeper level, however, the comparison is not merely between good and evil, but between evolution and degeneration, and it's the degeneration that leads us to this evil character of Hyde. Throughout the narrative, Mr. Hyde's physical appearance provokes disgust. He is described as ape-like, troglodytic, and hardly human. Now these I've highlighted because they are go-to quotations, really easy for you to remember, and they will always be relevant to every single essay that you have to write, because you'll always have to mention Hyde in your essay. He is half the novel, at least, after all, and therefore these quotations are always a go-to. As Mr. Enfield, a well-known man about town and distant relative of Jekyll's friend Mr. Utterson, observes, there is something wrong with his appearance, something displeasing, something downright detestable. So if you had to remember only part of that quotation, I think you would pick something downright detestable. You'd have the alliteration to talk about, and you'd also be able to talk about the repetition of some things, this triplet that emphasizes quite how horrible Hyde is. And the reason that there's something wrong with him and that there's something detestable in him is that he is not quite human, because he is an earlier form of mankind. In this novel, he represents an evolutionary ancestor of ours. Well, the reason that Stevenson is so excited about evolution, and why his readers will be so excited about it, is because it's a theory that's put forward really on by Charles Darwin. Not then, though, so that's when he was born. But it's starting to capture the public imagination because it comes at a time when scientific discovery about dinosaurs and fossils, for example, is suggesting that actually there were many kinds of life forms that predate the Bible. And up until this point, people thought the world was 6,000 odd years old, because you can trace that time frame from Genesis in the Bible, from Adam and Eve. And so their Christian faith is being challenged by this new science. And look at what Darwin says. It's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change. And when we look at change, of course, we're looking at what happens when Jekyll turns to Hyde and Hyde turns into Jekyll. Well, who is the most responsive to that change? Well, it's clearly Hyde, isn't it? He is the one who can control turning back into himself, and Jekyll can't. And what's interesting is Jekyll is more intelligent than Hyde. He's qualified, he's a doctor, he's a scientist, but he is not more powerful than Hyde. He's not the strongest. Dr. Jekyll is the strongest. He's much the larger figure, isn't he? But he doesn't survive. Hyde eradicates him. And this is a fascinating idea. Let me show you why. This is what we associate with the map of human evolution. So these are all the ancestors that have been well, no, they're quite not all of the ancestors have been discovered, but the vast majority of them, and we can see broad evolution towards man. However, there are some which are a surprise. So this one seems more primitive than that one. This one more primitive than that. And what Darwin's pointing out is that we're not evolving to some kind of perfection where you get the strongest and most intelligent at the end. Actually, it's just the one that's best at adapting to the environment. So we might get a form of evolution where we think of ourselves as the pinnacle, but actually we end up going backwards to an earlier form, or we go forwards to a form that's much like the earlier one, just because it's better at surviving. And that's what this novella is about. Hyde outlasts Jekyll in the same way that Stevenson is suggesting, well, perhaps future man will be much more like Hyde than like the apparently respectable Jekyll and Utterson. We could, as a species, be getting worse in terms of our morality, worse in terms of our intelligence, and worse in terms of what we're willing to do. We're going to be much more likely to commit crimes if we all become more like Hyde. And one of the ways he suggests we do become more like Hyde is that we all carry our own versions of Hyde inside us. That's the point of Dr. Jekyll. He hasn't created something wholly evil from nothing. He's created it from his own evil instincts. So Hyde is part of Jekyll. So if Darwin is right, if this is true, and we're not destined in terms of evolution to become better and better, does that mean that we don't actually have a soul? Does it mean that we're simply animals? Well, some 15 years before Jekyll and Hyde, Charles Darwin had published The Descent of Man, 1871. And look at the descent here, means we have been descended from a common ancestor. But it's much more powerful than that. Descent also means to go down. So another way of reading that title is to suggest that man is getting worse. We are descending, not ascending. A really interesting quotation that you can have here, just that title of Darwin's book. A book in which he concluded that humankind had descended from a hairy-tailed quadruped, as we saw, which was itself probably derived from an ancient marsupial animal. Going back even further, Darwin hypothesized that these stages of evolution had been preceded in a direct line by some amphibian-like creature, and this again from some fish-like animal. So quite an astonishing piece of science that has proven so far to be true. So it suggests, if we look at it like this, that actually we're not fully human. We are made up of all these subhuman, animal-like characteristics in our roots. So Stevenson's saying perhaps we can never escape those, or perhaps that's all we are. Well, this new idea was deeply, deeply upsetting. Such a nightmarish biological lineage that denied the specialness of humans feeds into many late Victorian Gothic novels. And so you can link this to the Gothic genre. The Gothic genre is partly created by this unease about whether we are more animal-like, whether we do have a soul, and whether our evil natures are just an expression of our animal personalities. And so we suddenly have the creation of Dracula, who is obviously evil, and Dracula is given the ability to transform into the shape of a wolf or a bat. And so that's one example. Another example is Dr. Moreau, a book that's not read much nowadays, but The Island of Dr. Moreau, where he experiments upon animals, hapless animals, on his island as he attempts a barbaric form of accelerated evolution. And this idea that we're accelerating and becoming more evolved doesn't change the fact in this novel that we're animalistic. We come from animals. So we've got two possibilities here in terms of the theology, in terms of Christianity. Okay, we might accept that we're evolved from animals, but that doesn't necessarily mean we don't have a soul. It might mean that that's part of our evolution. We've developed a soul. There is a God who's going to save us. Well, let's look at the death of Hyde to see what clues Stevenson gives us. Next, in the course of their review of the chamber, the searchers came to the cheval glass, into whose depths they looked with an involuntary horror. But it was so turned as to show them nothing but the rosy glow playing on the roof, the fire sparkling in 100 repetitions along the glazed front of the presses, and their own pale and fearful countenances stooping to look in. So the glass is a mirror, and Stevenson deliberately picks on this idea of them looking into a mirror because when we look into Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and we see these two people, they are the same person. And so this is a metaphor for how when we look into ourselves, we will also find that evil-like character, a character who we have to suppress. But both men, Poole and Utterson, look in with involuntary horror because it might be that in the depths is a stronger character. That evil personality might be stronger than our impulse for good. And a clue that that might be the case is the naming of this mirror, the cheval glass. Well, the cheval glass was actually its name, but of course, cheval is deliberately chosen because it's French for horse. In other words, Stevenson is highlighting again our animalistic identity, that this idea that we're just evolved from animals. We're not, in fact, this glorious species of human that is distinct from animals. So that's one way of looking at it. The other way, of course, is to say, no, we do have souls. When they look into the mirror, although they have this horror, they don't see that horrible self. However, we could go a step further and say, well, that's just a symbol of our hypocrisy. Utterson is quite happy to help Jekyll get away, even though he knows that Jekyll knows Hyde, but he's quite happy not to reveal that to the police. He's quite happy for Hyde to escape as a murderer, as long as Jekyll also escapes any taint of blackmail and scandal. So Utterson is a complete hypocrite. And look at the language here. It will show them nothing but the rosy glow. And so this use of rosy is suggesting that in this society, these respectable men literally presenting a rose-tinted version of themselves, like Jekyll, who presents his respectable front, hiding what is beneath. And what is beneath is the fire of Hyde, if you like, and it sparkles in 100 repetitions. So fire is dangerous, it's like Hyde, and it becomes much more powerful. There are hundreds of versions of it. So this imagery symbolizes our own capacity for violence. Right, let's look at this final piece here. This glass have seen some strange things, sir, whispered Poole, and this is a way of Stevenson telling us that the mirror is symbolic. He deliberately calls it strange because it links directly to the title of our novella, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So, decide for yourself whether Stevenson thinks we have a soul and we are capable of salvation. And if you would like more, don't forget to subscribe. Good luck in your revision.